Public Q&A presents AskReddit question. Serious, what was your creepy, unexplainable story as a child that was confirmed by your parents to have happened? In the house I grew up in, every night at around midnight these big loud footsteps would go stomping up and down the hallway a few times. I'd often think it was my dad getting up in the night, so sometimes I would stick my head out in the hall to see him, but there was no one there and I'd hear him snoring in his room. This isn't a particularly creepy story, but it's just strange that everyone confirms they heard these footsteps and no one was ever that bothered by it. It's like it happened for as long as we could remember, so we just accepted it. It was probably just your ghostly guard, making his rounds and keeping you safe. My dad tells a story of one time, when he was eating dinner at my mom's house before they were married with her whole family for like a Sunday dinner thing. In the middle of dinner, when everyone was sitting at the table eating, they heard footsteps upstairs walking down the hallway. A minute or so later, the toilet flushed, and the footsteps walked back down the hallway. My dad was like, "Yo, WTF?" And everyone else just kept eating like it was normal. He later asked my mom about it, and she's like, "Oh yeah, that's George, our ghost." I am surprised they still got married. One time my brother, his friend, and I saw lights in the sky that darted around like UFOs. We went to get my mom, and she was totally nonchalant about it. "Yep, those are UFOs," she said, and went back in the house. Her response was so subdued that we figured she was humoring us, and they weren't actually UFOs. Years later I asked her about it, and she said she had to force herself to act calmly because she was terrified. If she didn't know what they were, she was right in calling them UFOs. I saw something like this once. Me and a friend were down at the beach at night, and I was looking at this light in the sky. It was moving in a line a little faster than an airplane, then all of a sudden darted off to the side, then back up at an angle and disappeared. My friend saw it too, was freaky as. When I was a kid, my family lived in a blue house that was oddly shaped. One year the house got completely gutted and nearly destroyed by a flood, and they had to knock down a wall between the living room and kitchen. So after the flood, you could see all the way down the hall to my parents' bedroom door. This house is, or was, strange for lack of a better term. I was a terrible sleeper as a kid, and would routinely wake up and just go into the living room and watch cartoons on low volume if I couldn't go back to sleep. One morning I am out in the living room sitting across the chair with my feet up on a window. Don't ask me why, I was a stupid 8 or 9-year-old. From where the chair was, I could see just over the kitchen counter down that hall to my parents' room. A movement caught my eye. I looked up and saw the shadowy outline of a man walking towards me, kind of near to my parents' door. Thinking it was my dad, I said something like, "Hey Dad, sorry if the TV was too loud." Dad is a notoriously light sleeper, and would wake up from anything. Except there was no response. Within seconds my foot ends up going through the window again. Not sure if this is related, or I was a dumb kid, likely the latter, and I scream. And my parents actually wake up to figure out what is going on at 4:30 in the morning. At this point I am preoccupied, but realize much later that I definitely saw the outline of a man, but there was no way it was my dad because A, he came bounding out of their bedroom after my scream, and B, I realized the shoulders of that outline were much higher than what my dad's would have been. Fast forward to a few years ago, we've moved far away from the blue house, and my mom and I are hanging out and catching up. For some reason the blue house comes up, and I tell Mom that the place still gave me creeps, and weird stuff happened there when I was a kid. Mom's response: "Oh, you must saw the shadow man too." Edit. Photos of the house. First picture. The picture from the front has the front door and my room's window. That right side was the second hallway that had my room on one end and my sister's room on the other, with a bathroom between. Second picture. The side picture, you can see how the house goes back. The very back was my parents' room. I put my foot through the middle of the 3 windows on the second picture. "Oh, you must have seen the shadow man too," is never the response you want to hear. Ha ha ha, it was. I am sure my face was like, what the fuck, mom? It wasn't like she said it dramatically either, just sort of, oh, you too. So what other details did she have? What were her experiences? LOL, what the fuck is right? Now you mention the shadow man. Thanks, I didn't want to sleep ever again. Yeah, true, who needs to sleep anyways? I saw a couple ghosts when I was a kid, and I never told anyone because I knew they wouldn't believe me. Years and years later, when we were moving out, we were telling stories about stuff we'd done growing up, etc. Turned out everyone had seen things, almost the exact same things, but also never said anything cause they figured no one would believe it. I have a family member going through this exact thing. She finally told her husband that she'd been seeing this visitor on regular occasions, expecting him to scoff and tell her she's crazy. He just nodded and said, yep, I have been seeing him too. He didn't want to tell her because he's always been super anti-paranormal and thought she'd think he was crazy. I have also seen various shadow beings, and so too have my parents. When I was young, I woke one night to hear my mother screaming. Being tired, I didn't do anything, assuming it was part of a dream. I asked my mom about the scream in the morning, and she told me that she woke up and saw a shadow man standing at the bottom of her bed. It was only my father telling her that there was nothing there that calmed her down and sent her back to sleep. He hears my mom's story and confesses that he lied to her, that he saw the same figure but didn't want to scare my mom. Years later, I moved out into a flat. I wake one night to see a dark figure hovering over my bed. I ended up shouting at it, causing it to run away. My flatmate told me he heard me, but thought I could handle myself. Me and the same flatmate ended up moving to a flat across the street, where again I saw another shadow person running through my room. I eventually moved again to an old house, where I saw shadow figures on at least 2 occasions. My girlfriend ended up moving in, and she would hear things and felt that something was wrong with the house. My parents' dog came to stay when they went away on holiday, and he was nervous. He ended up positioning himself facing the door as if he was watching for something. Shortly after that, we got a dog of our own. We never saw anything ever again, ended up moving to a new build house, and have not seen anything. A funny story from my father. When he was young, he lived in a house he was sure was haunted. He walked past the stairs and looked up to see this beautiful girl around his age. The next time he looked up those same stairs, hoping to see the same woman, he instead saw a large and angry-looking man. My family had a shadow person too. My teenage brother wouldn't sleep in his bedroom upstairs. He opted to sleep on the enclosed porch that wasn't insulated. We live in MN. I was very young when this happened, so what I remember, and what I was told, is the main scariness for this story. So my family was driving around the backwoods on NHME area in the autumn to watch the leaves fall. We were staying at some cottage and my family came to this area pretty frequently. We were coming back from somewhere when my mother started screaming at my father for stopping abruptly. In front of us, on an unkept back road in the deep woods of New England at a pretty late hour, was a traffic jam of quite a few cars stopped in all directions. I remember a lot of bright headlights. I also remember seeing my dad's face as he turned around so he could see where he was reversing the car. My mom went completely silent through this whole thing. I just remember my dad saying eerily calmly, "Ugh, I hate traffic." He turned around and started driving back up the road we came down, and we started seeing cars going past us flashing their headlights. My dad just kept driving. The whole atmosphere went from "wasn't that a fun day" to "let's leave." Even as a kid, I went from annoying to quiet. Just a thickness in the air. Cars started coming up from behind honking and flashing lights, and eventually they just turned off the road, and we drove back to the cottage. Years later, I mean decades later, my dad and me were having a beer together. He says, "Remember up in the woods up north? We were driving around and we came to a weird traffic jam." I was like, "Yeah. Why? I honestly hadn't thought of it since that night. My dad goes, well, your mother and I were pretty sure that was one of those ambushes where they block the road and try to rob you and leave you in the woods or worse. You don't remember the cars coming up the road after us, trying to block us in? Or the cars chasing us and beeping at us until we hit random route? Well, kinda, but I just figured it was traffic or people being weird. He just kind of stopped talking about it after that and went on about how we should plant more trees in the backyard, but ones that don't drop leaves, because leaves suck. There was a creepy story I read on here a while back, where someone decided to take the back roads through Pennsylvania instead of the highway, to see the rural sights. After dark, he came across the scene of 2 beat-up cars with bodies hanging out of them, and more bodies in the road. Being a paramedic, he wanted to help, but he decided to pull through the accident site first to get a full idea of the whole situation. As he stopped the car on the other side of the accident scene, and hit his brakes, the brake lights lit up the whole thing, and he saw one of the bodies on the pavement sit up. Then the rest of the people got up and started towards him. Then a bunch of people came onto the road from the field. He peeled out, got back to the highway as soon as he could, and never took back roads again. Jesus, I shat myself reading that. If I remember correctly, the dude was a soldier, and he got bad vibes from the whole thing, and hit the brakes on a hunch, remembering ambushes from his deployment. Bro, you got to say he called the police afterwards. The fact that your dad brought that up years later. Poor dude is still haunted by that close call, probably on a fairly regular basis. Share more beers if he's still around. Dad is glad he's still got you all around. I can definitely understand the feeling of such a close call can haunt you. He can at least feel glad that he handled it incredibly well if all that the poster remembers is that it was just traffic or people being weird, and not a potentially life-threatening situation. Now that is something I will always be aware of when there is a traffic jam. I grew up Venezuela, and have mild PTSD with traffic jams. That was the go-to moment when people would get robbed or killed. Normally by people on motorcycles zipping in and out of traffic. Shit was wild. Now I don't ever want to drive again. Just remain calm, that's all I can say. Well, your mother and I were pretty sure that was one of those ambushes where they block the road and try to rob you and leave you in the woods or worse. Please explain this. Is this another thing I have to add to my list of things to worry about? It's called a stand and deliver robbery. Just always look for an avenue out of any traffic jam, and always check your mirrors regularly to know what's going on behind you. The worst is called a double-blocked ambush. Typically terrorists will block one direction beforehand, and then once you are in the box they will pull something behind to trap you. Usually in impassable terrain, or dense urban areas with no outlet streets. If you cannot reliably defend from your position, option A is to dismount and find a defensible position and call for help, or B, put your maximum effort into breaching the weaker side of the blockade, and in extremely rapid fashion. You have about 2 seconds to decide what to do. I was in one in Ramadi, Iraq, very near the Saddam Mosque. Luckily, we had more punch than they did, but it was a very bad 5 or 6 minutes. My grandmother was a real estate agent in Rhode Island. I was staying with her one summer, and she had to take me along to see a potential listing. It was a very strange house because it was circular. All the rooms went along the outside and connected to each other, and there was a center part with a little garden and open to the sky. She went up to the 2nd story, and I stayed downstairs because I wanted to walk around the loop one time. The problem started when I had walked a full loop, and I didn't see the stairs. I thought I must be confused, so I kept going to the next room, and still couldn't find them. I started to panic, so I began running around the house as fast as possible, checking every room for stairs, and there wasn't any. Finally, I sat down by the front door and started crying. A little while later my grandmother ran into the entryway room looking just as panicked as I had been, and asking where I was hiding, and why I was hiding, and not answering her calling out to me. I never heard her calling out to me at all. Actually, the house seemed so still and quiet while I was sitting there that I was sure she had forgotten and left me there. We went home and didn't talk about it really. Like 15 years later I brought it up to my mom and asked if she knew anything, or was this a crazy childhood nightmare I am remembering. She told me she remembered it clearly because my grandmother had called her, and was absolutely spooked because she couldn't explain what had happened and she thought she lost me, or I had been taken by someone while she was distracted. She had apparently been looking for me for a while. I still don't understand what happened really because the house wasn't even large or confusing to navigate. I still get chills when I think about it. Oh man, it's like the house was trapping you. That is freaky. Something very similar happened to me at my great-aunt's place in Canada. It was me 13 at the time, my parents, grandparents, and my 3 siblings staying in her 5-bedroom home. She was there too but was working majority of the time. The house was huge. 3 floors, the basement was its own 2-bedroom apartment huge. The basement was creepy because it was pitch black. She never went down there so there was no furniture or any signs of life. The center of the house was connected by these spiral stairs that were wide and huge. Her whole house was littered with antique porcelain dolls which absolutely did not help the creepy cold feel at all. One day everyone went to get some coffee and donuts while my brother 17, and I stayed back in the house. I was wandering through the ground floor and eventually I went looking for my brother. I went to every room, looking behind the couches and upstairs yelling and eventually screaming for him. I ran around the outside of the house, and eventually I looked down the big spiral stairs that led into the pitch-black basement, and went down there while yelling for my brother. As soon as my foot touched the bottom of the stairs to the basement, this absolute feeling of dread and despair hit me like a freight train. I ran upstairs but just like my nightmares, the stairs kept getting longer and longer. Eventually I made it to the ground floor where my brother looked sweaty and scared to see me. He yelled at me, "Where were you?" Almost the same time I yelled that too. Apparently he went everywhere looking for me. He was sitting on the couch in the living room, which I swore I looked at then he and decided he hasn't seen or heard me for a while, so he went to look around the house for me. He never heard me yell or scream his name, never saw anyone outside or heard any frantic footsteps anywhere. Just pure silence. He got panicked and the same time he looked at the stairs he sees me running up frantically. I haven't been back to that house but that memory still freaks me out. This seems like a fever dream honestly. These kind of physically impossible, breaking the laws of physics things scare me the most. If I were you, I would make it my life goal to find that house again and take pictures everywhere, especially the stairs. This harkens to the 5.5 minute hallway from House of Leaves. Where in RI was this? I grew up there and know a lot of the areas. My grandmother lived in Charlestown. I think this house was in the town, but I am not entirely sure. We had parked at a little bakery and walked down a dirt or crushed shell road to get to the house. Also the house kind of looked like a short lighthouse to me. It really would have been inconvenient to live in Imo because the rooms were all curved and every room connected to the next by a door with no hallways, so you have to walk through the rooms to go somewhere. It was totally empty and kind of boring looking inside, just beige dirty carpet and white walls. Wonder if the house was ridiculously well soundproofed. Or maybe you guys were always at the farthest ends of the circle from each other, both searching for the other and running in circles. When my family went to the Georgian mountain region, we rented a cottage. 2 bedrooms, so my brother and I took one, and our dad took the other with his GF. I woke up in the middle of the night to 3 figures in the room, all standing in various places, none of which were visible from the entrance of the room. I woke my brother up and we screamed for our dad, but when he came into the room, he refused to look at the figures and just told us to hide under the covers. Wasn't exactly confirmed, but his refusal to look where they were standing after begging him was telling. Shit still scares my brother and I. So he must have seen it from his peripheral vision, but refused to look at them head-on. I don't know, man, fathers being scared in stories like this is the scariest part to me. The ones who are supposed to protect us from all evil. Dude, that is what fucks me up the most about this story. Like, I can't imagine the panic I would feel when I was little if my dad all of a sudden lost the almost godlike courage and ability to protect me I thought he had. There is nothing that would invite panic in my heart more than seeing my father legitimately frightened at something. Fuck, I am 41 years old and that would absolutely be it. Like, well, he's scared, so we must be in some real deep shit now. He refused to look at them, or he couldn't see them. Like, was he scared too, and that's why he told you to hide under the covers? I never saw his head turn to look. Usually he's the type to look under the bed to make sure there are no monsters, but he seemed to not want to do this for some reason. He didn't look and insisted that you go to sleep because you brats disturbed his special time with his girlfriend, and he wanted to go back ASAP. Most probable explanation right here. This. I love how everyone's like, oh spooky, your dad couldn't bear to look at the shadowy figures. When in reality, he was probably just sick of his son going on about monsters, when he was just trying to have a nice time camping. In Mom's seaside hometown, there was an offshore decommissioned lighthouse. Even though utilities to it had long been shut off, and the lighthouse was locked, it would randomly light up clearly visible in all directions. No one could explain it. It happened so infrequently and at odd hours of the night that by the time officials examined the structure, there were no signs of activity. To this day, as I have mentioned here once before, the lighthouse remains mysterious and a bit creepy. I love a good lighthouse mystery. Why are they so creepy? I'd say it's because they represent the final edge between us and the endless seas. They represent the point of no return. Edit. Wow, I never got this many likes before one. My interpretation is lighthouses represent isolation. A lone person on their own guarding the seas with not a soul around them, ever. It's like being in solitary confinement. Isolation is inherently soul-crushingly macabre to humans. Add in torrential rainfall, and lots of fog or dark night, or unusual boat noises, or waves crashing or strange monolithic objects sticking out of an otherwise natural area, common associations with lighthouses, and you have your scary story. Did you watch The Lighthouse? Recent psychological thriller by the same guy who directed The Witch. It was very well made, but it does take an emotional toll on the viewer. Fucking amazing movie. I am really happy that Robert Pattinson is breaking out from under the shadow of Twilight. I always think of it from the other way. Only thing stopping ships from crashing into the cliffs. I may be wrong, but I am fairly sure the main light on a lighthouse is powered independently from the grid for safety reasons. Power outages are more likely in stormy weather, which would be an obvious problem for a lighthouse. You are kind of correct. Whilst they used to be powered by oil or kerosene before the advent of electric power, for much of recent history, they were a rotating arrow beacon. This is invariably what you will see when a lighthouse is shown in film or on TV, run off the grid but backed up by a diesel generator. Modern lighthouses are now basic, bare-bones steel towers with automated solar-powered LEDs backed up by battery. The actual inhabited lighthouse is in danger of going the way of the dinosaurs. There is only one manned lighthouse in the entire United States. That's ridiculous. Who's going to scare away the ghosts? The ghosts won. The lighthouses are their domain now. That's probably it. I am guessing that a static charge or something might build up somewhere in there, then randomly gets discharged, letting the light shine. Either that, or if the utilities are still hooked up, but just disabled, then an error might happen at the power station, will allow energy to flow occasionally and light it up, then the error automatically corrects itself. Could happen during a routine maintenance check. I have an old toy from when I was a kid, the battery's long since dead in it, 27 years give or take, but sometimes it will pop on and come to life for an hour or two, and then die again. It's an old airplane toy, the sound it makes is a jet flying. You really buried the letter there, mister. My house is clearly haunted. I woke up one night when I was 12 because I dreamt that my older brother got into a car accident. I got out of bed and wandered downstairs to the kitchen to get something to drink. My mother was sitting there and asking me why I was awake. I told her I had a bad dream and need something to drink. I got a glass of water when it ringed at our door. My mother went to look who is there in the middle of the night. 2 police officers that asked if they could come inside for a moment. I couldn't hear. I am a very skeptical person, but this one got me. When I was a teen, I used to have breakfast with my mother every morning, and we used to tell each other weird dreams that we had last night. One morning she told me that she had a dream in which she was in a truck with my father, driving in the night through the desert, until my father falls asleep. My mom freaks out, takes the wheel while trying to maintain the car in the lane, and starts screaming for my dad to wake up. A few days after, I am talking with my father and tells me that he almost had an accident while driving his truck in the night after working in the mines. He fell asleep for a few seconds and almost crashed. If it's not because he heard a woman screaming, I managed to wake up. Please don't tell your mother, he said. He ended up telling her anyway, and now it's one of our weird stories that we share in family meetings. She probably astral projected. My mother is that kind of lady. Since I was a kid, I remember her reading all these books about astral project, meditation, aura, etc. We joke that she is a witch. She takes that as a compliment. My father doesn't believe in that, me neither, but really weird stuff had happened my mother. In the 80s, when I wasn't even born, my family lived in this old villa in which creepy things happened. My 3 brothers were kids, so they have a lot of creepy stories about that old house, but one that always makes us laugh is that one morning my mom got up and gets ready to go working while my brothers get ready to go to school. My mother goes to this huge mirror in the middle of the house to do her hair, and in that exact moment, when she looks the mirror, it shattered and everyone saw that. Maybe even the house recognized my mother as a witch, lol. Me and my mom predicted that tsunami that banged stuff up in Japan years ago. Both dreamt it 2 days prior. Huge waves, people running, etc. Our dreams were different, but both had the huge wave. The sky even got red for me, I remember that much. When I was 9 or 10, my dad took me to visit with an older hunting buddy friend of his. My parents were divorced and my dad lived in another part of the country, so while I had known this guy since I was a toddler, I didn't share the same common interests as either of them. The older friend was a gun dealer and had lots of catalogs. This was before the internet was in wide use to order bullets, magazines, guns, etc., and they often spent hours going through listings to determine what they wanted to order. We got there fairly early and my dad said that after an hour or 2 we'd all go to Hardee's for breakfast before going to shoot clay birds. Now I am a youngin', I don't care much about guns or hunting for sport, and am just incredibly bored, so I start wandering around the house, reading my video game magazines that I brought with me, and very quickly that hour or 2 has passed and they're still down there. I ask if they're going to leave anytime soon, and the friend suggests I check the refrigerator in the kitchen and see if there's anything I want to eat. I look through the fridge and find nothing. However, on the kitchen table I see an apple and decide that will be appetizing enough to hold me over. As I pick up the apple and prepare to take a bite, at that point his wife steps in and tells me don't eat that. Everything in the bowl is wax. I tell her thank you for warning me, and continue to wander around the house burning time until we can get going. Maybe another 30 minutes later I go back to the basement, where they're going through catalogs, and ask when we are going to Hardee's. My dad's friend asks if I am still hungry after going through their fridge. I tell him that I was going to eat an apple, but his wife told me it was wax before I made the mistake. Both of them give me a blank stare, and after about 20 seconds of shock my dad explains that his wife recently passed away. I then go back through the house to try to find her to show that they were just joking with me, but sure enough she was nowhere to be found. Roughly 30 years later, before he passed away, my dad still insisted that I must have imagined it. But I didn't. She told me not to eat the wax fruit. Geez, imagine if your unfinished ghost business was to protect a bowl of waxed fruit for eternity. Better than the undead in Skyrim. I guard this chest for all of eternity. I put on the master lock, I hid it behind the table, I made the booby traps, and I stand here as a last line of defense. Under no circumstances on my life should anyone acquire the master's 32 gold and wooden sword. That is both wholesome and scary. Also, damn user icontricolate's dad. Feed your darn child. Don't bring up Hardee's and leave a kid hanging for 2 more hours. Man, selfish ghost only stopped you from ruining her wax fruit. Why couldn't she at least drive you to Hardee's? About 5 years ago, my parents were sitting out on the back porch on a summer night. Out of the corner of her eye, my mom saw a person-sized white translucent figure float by a tree. She asked my dad if he saw it too, and he said yes. He is a tough guy, but he was really freaked out, and so was she, so they both went inside. The next morning my mom was walking by the tree, where they saw the figure, and she noticed a very old-looking earring sitting on top of the dirt. She doesn't wear earrings, and it wasn't the kind of earring I would wear. It looked like it belonged to an old lady, and it was just dropped there. My mom brought it inside and put it in her jewelry box. The next day it was sitting in the middle of the basement floor. From then on I started hearing footsteps and whispering in my room at least once a week until I moved out. She let it enter the house. That shit was diamonds. Ain't no reason to not keep a haunted diamond-encrusted old lady summoning ancient earring without its match. Yup, don't know why, but at least it's a nice casual ghost. For real. Fuck that shit. That's the ghost version of plugging in a USB drive you found in a parking lot. Wow, this creeped me out. At my parents' house I used to hear my mom calling out to me when she didn't, and she confirmed she'd hear me call out to her when I didn't. That was a common occurrence. Also, whenever I would be alone for a little while, if my mom was late from work or at the grocery store, I would usually be in the main living room playing N64. I would oftentimes hear loud banging sounds from upstairs, as if a heavy piece of furniture tipped over. I would go check and nothing was out of place. Both my mother and grandmother have confirmed similar experiences when they're alone in the house. There was also the time I was downstairs on my laptop, everyone else was in bed, it was after midnight, and I didn't realize just how dark everything had gotten without the lights on. I am zoned out when I begin to hear what sounds like a murmuring from behind me. Like the low rumble you'd hear at a gathering when people are talking and you can't make out conversation. The hairs on my neck immediately stood up and my body locked up from fear. Tears ran down my face from the physical reaction my body was having. I refused to acknowledge it and kept staring at my laptop screen in silence. It took forever for my body to go back to normal. Some time later I told my mother what happened and it freaked her out because she said she's heard the murmuring as well. I have always hated that house. I assume you had no brothers, sisters, and you and your mom lived alone. Since you didn't mention anyone noticing anything strange. But fuck, so I assume from your mention of the N64 and a laptop that this has or had been a thing happening for decades. My dad is the type that refuses to acknowledge anything supernatural. Even if he did experience anything, I doubt he'd admit it in conversation, or find a reason to justify how it happened. Like I am a skeptic, but I know things have happened to me that I can't explain. My sister is 12 years younger than me, so it's not like I really ever chat with her on the regular, but now that she's in her 20s, she's also confirmed weird shit happened to her as a kid. We've always been a dog family, and on more than one occasion our dog will act funny towards certain spots in the house. I am a parent of toddlers and kids now, and I have a creepy story from last year. We were driving with my then 3-year-old son in the car, and stopped at a red light next to a cemetery. Out of nowhere, my son looked over at the cemetery and said there are people laying down there, and they can't get up. My wife asked my son what he was talking about, and he pointed to the cemetery and said all of the people laying down in the park are stuck. My wife and I just looked at each other in silence, completely freaked out. At this point in our son's life, there had been no deaths in the family, and we had never discussed death with him. I am still creeped out when I think about it. And that's why I am getting cremated, motherfucker. There's bits of burned people everywhere, and they can't reassemble, kid. Whispers. I see midi-chlorians. When my daughter was a baby, old enough to be standing and climbing, but not really talking yet, we lived next to a small old graveyard. There were a number of children's graves with tiny blank stone markers and unmarked mounds. She loved to stand at the window on that side of the house, and would laugh and wave at nothing. Same with the deck, she'd toddle to that side and only that side, jabbering and giggling and waving. She'd just sit there watching for a weirdly long time. It was a little freaky, but we finally decided that whoever was there must be friendly, and it kept her happy. This reminds me of a story of my niece when she was little, about 3. They lived across the street from an old country graveyard, and she was looking at the window laughing. When asked why, she said there are people dressed funny dancing. I have a similar story. We were going to my great-uncle's funeral, and my 4-year-old niece says out loud at the cemetery, "Look at the people in the trees." Nope. 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 I am not 100% sure this fits, because my mom confirmed it years ago, then denied it when I asked her again a couple months ago, but here it is. When I was little, my dresser, it was long but pretty short, sat against the wall with one of the ends pointed to my door. That dresser is heavy, an old wood one with all sorts of kid crap neatly arranged on top. Since it was in my bedroom, the floor was carpet. I always slept with the door closed. One night, with no explanation, the dresser tipped over. But instead falling forward, it fell 180 degrees to the side, falling in front of my door, all the kid crap spilling to the side. My mom ran to get me, but couldn't open the door as it was being blocked by the dresser. Eventually, with her pushing and me pulling on the dresser, she was able to slip in and move the dresser out of the way. Nothing was damaged, not even the glass figurines I had. My dad helped put it upright the next day, and we moved on. Years later, I remembered the incident and asked my mom about it, expecting to learn that I blew it out of proportion, and it only fell forward or something like that. Nope, she remembered that night as well. However, she added one detail that I could never figure out. She thought she heard me jumping on the bed that night, and that was why she thought the dresser tipped over. I had been asleep. I have no idea where she heard that noise coming from. I am confused as to how the dresser fell. Do you mean it tipped over onto its side and was perpendicular to the floor, sticking straight up? Or do you mean it fell onto its front, but was spun around sideways to be perpendicular to the wall instead of just in front of it? It was spun perpendicular to the wall. Not necessarily creepy, but when I was around 11 or so, my mom and I were going about 40 miles outside of town for a typical orthodontist appointment. The trip typically took about 35 minutes, give or take a few for traffic. However, this one time I kind of zoned out while being driven, and upon arriving we remarked, "Wow, that was fast." We were earlier for my appointment than usual despite leaving at a consistent time for each appointment. Upon looking at our vehicle's clock and confirming with a watch my mom had on, it had mysteriously taken us only 10 minutes to drive the usual 35-minute distance. We have no recollection of anything happening during those 10 minutes, and it never happened again, but it left us with a very weird feeling. We still wonder what we drove through to this day. A few years ago, I was driving home from an event with my husband. The interstate in this particular area are totally separated, going opposite ways. There are concrete dividers and then nothing in between them, just air because they're elevated. Suddenly the music we were listening to just stopped and we realized we were on the other side going in the opposite direction. There's no physical way this could have happened, and we can never even imagine a logical explanation. You know, I am just going to say it. Aliens. But he saw it too, right? That's really weird. He was driving, we had to get off the interstate at the next exit and turn around. It was very scary. The same thing happened to my family when I was an infant. My mom and grandma were driving down an out-of-the-way highway in the middle of the day, and they were about to reach the specific store they were going to. Next thing either of them know, the sun is setting, and they were driving the opposite direction too. Both of them had the exact same experience. I am no physicist, but a wrinkle in space-time is my best guess. This really happens. Once my dad took us to a place 300 kilometers away in a matter of 2 hours. The trip usually takes 6. I was awake the entire time, and we weren't going 150. Still makes me wonder what happened. Space is warped and time is bent. I have heard about people who claim to have been abducted by aliens describe something like this. Supposedly they have a period of time they don't remember and can't account for. This is more like a lack of time, where they zoom forward in time or travel longer distances in lesser times. I think he's just pointing out the similarities between alien abductions and missing time stories. When I was young, I apparently had a few odd interactions with animals. I would know a person had animals before we went in the house. They tended to come over to me before my parents, mostly just little things that were probably explainable by me, a fairly observant little kid. The one that sticks out to my parents, though telling it the way they do, is we went to a new car garage to have them work on our car. As we pull up, the owner has a big old black lab laying in the middle of the lobby. The guy informs us the dog is comfortable with people, we can pet him if we want. I shake my head and say he's sad though. Dad looks at me, asks why I think that. I reply he lost his ball, he's sad now. Dad said the owner went pale, stared at me for a minute, and then looked at Dad, said he's had a favorite ball for 10 years that just went down the sewage drain yesterday, and I couldn't get it back out. Just reach in the sewer and get it back from the nice clown. Slightly similar. I have had a thing with cats my whole life. If someone had a cat who was terrified or hated people, it would walk up to me for pets and sit in my lap. I have never had the psychic moment though. Kind of the opposite, but I distinctly remember sitting in the front seat of a van with one of my mother's acquaintances whilst she went to collect something. The guy told me in detail about cutting up, cooking and eating humans. He said palms were a delicacy you could fry up like bacon. Only occurred to me as an adult that he was probably lying. Now I have the rumbling in my tummy that can only be satisfied by hands. Definitely lying, palms don't crisp up well at all. Not enough fat. Tough too, from hands being used all the time. So I don't actually remember this, but my mom told me about it. My grandfather died when I was a year old. Prior to his death, he loved to play with me and would make me laugh in this very specific way. The night he died, my mom heard me making noise. So she goes in assuming I am crying, but I am not. I am staring at the ceiling, laughing hysterically just like my grandfather used to make me laugh. She's still convinced he came to say goodbye to me. I have a similar story, don't remember, but my mom, who I trust, tells me about it. Close to my grandma until she died when I was 2. We used to play this game where she'd go shh, listen. And we'd shut our eyes and get quiet, and just listen to the world. Well, when she died I didn't go to the funeral since I was 2 and afterwards mom takes me to the cemetery to take me to her tombstone to explain some stuff and when we get there as mom's parking I suddenly go, shh. Listen. And cover my eyes and go quiet. Mom doesn't think much of it, but then she gets me out of the car, and I just book it into the cemetery and somehow end up finding some family tombstones, not my grandma's but she's close by. And like I had never been here before, I couldn't even read the tombstone names. Mom says it freaked her out. I am glad that you had such a beautiful person in your life. That's super wholesome. Your grandfather was probably a good person. My mom said that I used to have premonitions when I was little, under the age of 10. My great-aunt and great-uncle were like grandparents to me, and used to come visit in the summer from Mexico to the US. I would miss them terribly, then they would go. One year when they were leaving, I cried and cried. My mom said, "Don't worry. They'll be back next year." I remember sobbing and throwing a small child fit. Apparently I said to my mom, "No, you don't understand. Tio great-uncle is never coming back." And she kept trying to reassure me they'd be back next year. I kept repeating he's never coming back. I didn't say anything about my great-aunt. Sure enough, he passed away and never came back within a few weeks or months. My mom said it was really creepy, and I also predicted my great-aunt passing as well. Oh, your poor younger self. You must have felt heartbroken. My granny died when I was little. I don't even remember her. My aunt and mom always told me this story. I was at my house when I was little, I think about 4. The phone rang and I answered it. They got onto me for answering the phone. I told them it was my granny calling to see if I was okay. I told her yes and hung up. She had recently passed away. They said they were a little creeped out by it, but insisted it really happened. When I was little, probably about 5, my great-grandmother passed away from cancer. We were very close. She watched me nearly every day, and would sing to me before my naps. "You are my sunshine" in particular. It was a few days after she died, and I can instinctively remember waking up to someone stroking my hair and singing "You are my sunshine." At first, I thought it was my mom, but it was unlike her to do something like that. I turned and found no one there. I even remember getting up and checking my parents' room to find they were both asleep. Both my parents kind of just nonchalantly dismiss it, but I swear it was her saying goodbye to me. A grandmother's love is so strong, even death cannot break it. The shoelace. I woke up one morning and the shoelace from one of my sneakers had completely vanished. Just on one shoe. The lace on the other shoe was still there. I do not ever remove the laces of my shoes. The shoes were right beside me by my bed all night. I have always been a ridiculously light sleeper. The slightest sound wakes me up. Nothing woke me that night. Moreover, the door was closed to my room, the floorboards creaked whenever anyone stepped on them, and the room was small. I 100% would have noticed someone coming in. Nothing else was disturbed in the entire house. Nothing had been moved or taken, no signs of forced entry. My mum noticed nothing all night. She also has no sense of humor. There was nobody in the house aside from me and her, and nobody but us had the keys. We didn't have mice, and there were no traces of the missing lace anyway. There is absolutely no way that shoelace could have gone missing. My mum remembers it well, but as soon as I mention it, she immediately doesn't want to talk about it because it freaks her out. Either somebody broke into the house and did nothing except take a single shoelace, or the house was haunted and a ghost took it. I am sorry, your mom has no sense of humor. Golden State Killer used to take things, like a person's shoelaces, to tie them up with. Most victims reported waking up to find he already had something belonging to them ready to use. Maybe a similar psycho came to your room, then decided you weren't very rape-able after all and left. Damn, even my ghost rapist finds me ugly. Holy fucking shitting fuck. Well, sweet fucking hell, this is even worse. Dude, don't scare us like that. It was an asshole mouse. The underpants gnomes were drunk again. When I was a kid, my mom used to work at a small grocery store, and she went there before breakfast to get fresh bakery goods when she had the afternoon shift. Then she used to wake me up for school and ask how I slept, and I used to tell her what dream I had that night, if any. One morning I told her I dreamed that two guys broke into the store and they left a red screwdriver on the floor. My mom was shocked because there really was a break-in that night. That is why she couldn't buy stuff for breakfast that morning, but couldn't talk with police or colleagues at the time to get more details. I then went to school. My mom did the afternoon shift, and on the evening, when she came home, she told me that the police really did found a screwdriver on the scene, which belonged to the burglaress. This all happened in Europe, a small town around the early 90s, no CCTV, and the burglaress never got caught, but this was still a very strange experience. My mom made me fill out a lottery ticket the next day, LOL, but never won with it, and never had such dreams since then. I love that she got you to pick out a lottery ticket, she just rolled with it. When I was a baby, my mom rented a house from a friend who claimed it was haunted. She didn't believe it until she would hear 1 to 2-year-old me sitting in my bed talking to two men that I had said lived in the ceiling. She said she always thought my older sister would leave the TV on, thinking that's where the voices came from, until she heard me speaking back and my baby or toddler talk to them. She said the last month we lived there, I was a little over 2, she was in the bathroom directly across my bedroom when she heard a man talking in my room. It was late, I was supposed to be asleep, and my mom says she just froze and listened. She says she couldn't understand what he was saying. Then the other man started talking, and she was freaked out and praying I was asleep, and the men were just breaking in, and would come out and leave me alone. Then she heard me talking and she rushed in the room. She said she practically broke the doorknob, and sees nothing but me in my toddler bed. She said I looked at her with my bitch's face, and was mad. She said she asked me who was I talking to, and I told her I was talking to the angels. Apparently I was pissed and pointed to the ceiling, and just got so angry at her about her coming in. You made them go away. I don't remember any of it, to be honest, just what she told me. She believes in all those TV psychics and ghosts. I try to hold back and not be the dick and show her how psychics are fake and ghosts are probably not real. A friend of mine had a similar experience. She ended up checking her attic and figured out that someone had been living up there for a while. That's a nope from me. I would actually prefer a ghost TYVM. I live in Colombia, and my father is a doctor, and while growing up, his main work was as hospital director of the most isolated hospitals in rural areas. The good thing is that you'll get used to weird sounds on the night, and the silent night watchers, mostly old folks walking around without even a flashlight. Usually most of the hospitals we lived in were new and nice, until we got to an old town at the south of the country that was just partially renewed, and most of the construction was the old public retirement home or sanitarium, if you could call it home, with a big part basically destroyed. Falling ceilings, broken walls, you get the picture. One of my hobbies was to spend the evening playing domino with the head nurse and the night watchman, and joining them on their night walks. One night I was with Pasquale, walking around one of the old areas, when I felt the urge to look back, and then it was a white or gray shadowy figure in front of a boarded room that honestly always gave me the creeps. I remember holding his hand really hard, and that when he told me just don't look, she loves to scare people, and if you look for too long, it can get inside you. At that point I honestly was more terrified of how calm he was than the specter itself. The good thing is that I ended up building the courage to walk through a bush area behind the constructions where the ambulances used to park, just to avoid crossing near the damned room. The fact that he told you don't look for too long, it can get inside you, gave me the biggest chills of all the comments here. Fuck. Hell. No. Very long story, unfortunately got lots to unload. Pensive face. I grew up having a normal boring life and developed some issues that led to this outing. I have an irrational fear of bodies of water and puddles of water with the sky reflected in it. Especially when you cannot see the bottom, like murky dark water and shit. Sometimes I think I am cool with it and go out for some watery fun, but it always ends with me freaking the fuck out at some point and scrambling to get out of the water. Get back onto solid ground with no water in sight. I regularly turn my head when I pass anything to do with water. Been seeing shrinks and doing phobia exercises, but nothing has ever worked. I sometimes thought I got over it, but it would just as easily come back. One time it happened at a buffet when I saw a large tall pot filled with soup. A thin film was formed on top, and a light source somewhere made a sheen on top of the soup, and it caught my eyes. I panicked and looked down at my feet, but it did not help, and I ran out of the room. I kept getting the urge to stomp my feet to assure me that there was some ground beneath me, and that I would not sink into the ground. If you put a glass of water near me, and the water is moving, I have to look away because it is nauseating, kind of like making me seasick. Then when I was little I would have dreams of someone holding me tight, and jumping into the sky with me, and we'd land in water, and I gasp for air and wake up. Talked to a few shrinks about it, and we got past it with, "It's just dreams. They don't mean anything and looks like your brain is trying to process something. Did you read a book, saw a movie, or heard an exciting story that caught your attention? Maybe it's that." Anyway, 35 years of this shit. I was at my parent house, and we got to talking, and I said I was still dealing with this, and I was having that dream again. The dream would return during winter and rainy periods. Funny thing is I was in Europe for a month, and no dreams. I don't know what I said that made my parent tell me this story. My dad grew up on a farm with his parents, 2 sisters, and an apparent older brother that no one ever told me or ever talked about. His brother had gone through some shit, and became a drug addict, basically a junkie, and he would steal farm equipment and sell it to buy drugs. One day he came home all fucked up and my dad and grandpa got into a fight with him, and shit got really heated. Guns were drawn, pitchforks, spades were used, blood was spilled. They removed him from the farm, and told to get gone and don't come back. I was about 9 months old back then, so naturally I don't remember shit, and nobody ever talked about it, not the kind of topic you'd bring up at family gatherings. So anyway, they chased him away, but it did not end there. Later that evening my grandparents left to visit some friends in the town over, and his brother saw an opportunity and came back. Shit started all over again between those two. My mom was sitting on the back porch with my aunt and me. She heard all the noise, and put me in my crib with my aunt, and went inside the house to come out the front to see what was going on. Meanwhile my father was chasing my brother around the house, and they ended up on the back porch. This is when shit got ugly. Probably 5 to 10 minutes that scarred people for life. My dad could not finish the story that day. I could see pain and anger on his face. He got teary-eyed and his voice broke. I got scared because this was the first time I saw him like this. I grabbed him and hugged him and told him it was okay, he didn't have to tell me. My mom during this the whole time was sitting on the chair's arm and leaning on his back with her head on his shoulder. She was silently crying the whole time and comforting Dad. I did not notice that she was stroking his back the whole time Dad was telling this. I ended it there, and 4 months later my dad built up enough courage to tell me the rest. I could see it in his eyes that he was angry, he was grieving, he was remorseful. Long story short, he never told me the details, and they never talked about it amongst themselves to work out what actually happened. I had to piece this from reluctant friends and family. Back to him chasing his brother to the back of the house. His brother ended up grabbing me from my crib. My aunt tried to stop him. He punched her, she fell and hit her head on the wall, falling down and started bleeding. Meanwhile my mother is seeing this shit happening from inside. She grabs my dad's rifle and comes out the back. Sees my uncle holding me in his arm near the house well, and onto down on the floor. She panics and shoots in the sky. Somehow in all this I ended up falling, or being thrown into the well. They don't know if he threw me in it or if the gunshot scared him, and he just let me go unintentionally, or maybe it was intentional. From here on stuff got blurry for everyone, things happened so fast. My dad ended up killing his brother and spent 4 years in jail. My aunt dived into the well with an open head wound to save me. while she was down there she lost consciousness and drowned, crying face holding me up. My mom was up above trying to calm my father down, and trying to throw stuff in the well for my aunt to hold on to. Eventually my dad came to senses and jumped down with a rope into the well to grab me, and what he then found out his now deceased little sister. That was my Auntie Ellen. Her last words were to my mom, "I am okay, he is okay, it's okay, help Stu." When I was growing up, we'd visit her grave site. She is buried on the farm, and I never thought anything of it. My dad was very good at hiding emotions, and my mother stood next to him like a pillar, always standing by to catch him. Some events in life can leave a lasting impact even if you are not fully aware. I would like to think that my dream was of Aunt Ellen jumping into the well to save me. That is how I wish to remember her and my father's sacrifice. He almost lost his whole world that day. He lost a brother and sister that day and almost lost me. I often wonder if I never brought up my problems, would they have ever told me? Wow! You are still with us. Thanks for being such a nice person. As long as you are here, why not like this video and subscribe to our channel? Also you can press the bell icon, so you won't miss any future uploads.